When I was first appointed to WorldVenture in 2008, I was the only person in my appointment class that didn't have a location. And I remember sitting and having conversation with Jeff Denlinger in particular, and we started talking about calling. We had put on my budget line item that I would be going to Beirut, Lebanon, simply because I needed a location to start raising support, and I liked Lebanese food. But that was about it. And he asked me if I was actually called to go to the Middle East. And I told him I wanted to go to the 1040 window. I wanted to work with leaders of children. I wanted to work in an urban center where there were people, and it fit the bill. I was willing to go anywhere. And he said, well, that's not exactly what I asked you. I asked you, are you called to go there? And I said, well, what do you mean by that, you know? And he said, let me answer that question by asking you another question. Can you live with death? And I said, well, I'm signing up to be a missionary. I'm willing to die for the sake of the gospel. He said, that's not what I asked you. Are you willing to live with death? And I asked him, what did he mean by that? And he said, well, imagine a scenario where you're walking to your place of ministry, and on the way you pass a school and children are playing and singing and playing games, and the teachers are rounding them up for their day's activities. And you go to serve in your place of ministry, and on the way home, you come back and you pass what was the school, and instead it's the burnt out remains of a building, and the voices are silent. And you have to go home and continue to live. Can you live with death? And he said, depending on how you answer that question, it's okay to recognize that God might not be calling you into that volatile situation, which often is places in the Middle East. It's okay to recognize that he might be calling you to a place where your job and your purpose might be somewhere else. And as I thought and prayed about that, I realized that God had put in me a heart for the Myanmar people, for Southeast Asia, a place that was known for being a place of peace. I wasn't really willing to live with death. And God shifted my path from Beirut, Lebanon, to be focused on the nation of Myanmar. In the last year, I've had to live with death. There was a military coup, and military would break into homes and murder innocent children. And it struck me that this scenario, this scene that Jeff painted for me 13 years ago, is a scene that I live with my daily reality now. But there was no mistake in God's calling on my life to be in that place. The only thing was 13 years have passed. Those were 13 years where God has done a work in my heart. He's prepared me, and he's given me example after example after example of his faithfulness. And God has put me in a place where now I can say, I can live with death. WorldVenture has a slogan that says that we are compelled by the love of God, willing to risk it all. And during the military coup, many people tried to get me out of Myanmar, saying, what are you doing there living in a war zone? Why won't you get out? There's too many risks. And I remembered families. I remembered situations in the United States where you could be driving down the interstate and killed in a car crash. There's risks even in the United States. And living overseas in the middle of a war zone, I realized there were risks living in a place where bombs were going off in the street, gunshots were happening, protests were happening, and military were shooting into crowds of people. But I've come to realize that if the risks are worth God's kingdom purposes, then the risks are worth it. And I'm happy to be part of an organization that is compelled by the love of God, willing to risk it all for the sake of God's kingdom work.